We used to have Sunday dinners every week without fail. The table set by noon, something in the oven, the kids chasing each other through the hallway. Melanie would be in the kitchen, not because I asked her to, but because she wanted to. That was her thing. She had a playlist she only played on Sundays. Something about it felt like a signal. This is family time. This is ours. That was 4 years ago, maybe 5. Hard to pinpoint exactly when things started to shift, because it wasn't a single moment. It was gradual, the kind of change you only notice when you look back and realize the table hasn't been set on a Sunday in months. We met in Huntsville, lived here our whole lives, got married at Willowbrook Baptist where both our families attended. The kind of wedding where people from your parents' church sit next to your college friends, and somehow it all feels right. Melanie was 24. I was 26. We weren't naive. We knew what we were building. 2 kids came along. Ethan, who's 5 now, obsessed with trucks and anything with wheels. And Clara, 7, who already acts like she runs the house, which honestly she might. We bought a house on the north side. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, good school district. I drive a 2011 Toyota Tacoma that I keep maintained. We had a Chase account, a joint budget, a routine. We weren't rich. We were steady for years. That was enough. More than enough. Then Melanie started spending more time with 2 women she met through a local fitness group, Julie Vaughn and Arya Pind. Julie had been through a divorce 2 years before her call. From what I heard, Arya was single, never married, and had a lot of opinions about what marriage does to women. They weren't bad people. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But they had a view of the world that didn't match anything Melanie and I had ever agreed on or talked about or even considered. At first, it was nothing. Late brunches on weekends, a few nights out, fine. Melanie needed her own space, her own friendships. I never had a problem with that. But somewhere in those conversations, something started coming home with her. Not right away. It moved slowly, the way a crack moves through a wall. You walk past it every day, and at some point you realize it's not the same crack anymore. It's wider. It goes deeper, and the wall is still standing, but you're not sure for how long. The first thing I noticed was the Sunday dinner stopping. No conversation about it. No decision. One week there was no food in the oven. No playlist. Ethan asked why we weren't eating together. Melanie said she was tired. Okay. Next week, same thing. Then it just became normal. A tradition that had existed for years quietly disappeared, and I was the only one who seemed to notice it was gone. Then came the language. Words I had never heard her use before. Space, pressure, my identity. Not in fights, just in conversations, dropped in casually like they'd always been part of her vocabulary. They hadn't. I know how Melanie talked. I've been listening to her for over a decade. I didn't say anything yet. I watched. That's what I do. I'm not a reactor by nature. I'm a mechanic. I look at what's in front of me, figure out what's broken, and decide whether it's worth fixing or whether the part needs to be replaced entirely. I applied that same approach to what was happening in my house. I watched, I listened, and I started keeping track. The school sent a reminder home in Clara's backpack on a Thursday, parent-teacher conference the following Tuesday at 6:30. I pulled it out of her folder that evening, put it on the kitchen counter where Melanie would see it, and mention it at dinner. Got it, she said. She was looking at her phone. Tuesday came. I got off work at 5, picked up Ethan from daycare, swung by the house to get Clara. Melanie's car was gone. I texted her. No answer for 40 minutes. By the time she replied, the conference had already started. She said she lost track of time. She was with Julie. I went alone, sat across from Clara's teacher, a young woman named Ms. Hadley, who was professional enough not to say anything about the empty chair beside me. She told me Clara was doing well, a little distracted lately, and asked if everything was okay at home. I told her we were fine. I smiled. I drove the kids home and put them to bed. That was the first time I wrote something down. Not in any dramatic way, just a note on my phone. Date, what happened, what was said. I didn't know why I was doing it at the time. Instinct. Maybe the same instinct that makes you photograph a dent on a rental car before you drive off the lot. Over the next 2 months, the notes added up. Melanie stopped coming to church. Not a conversation, not a reason given. She just stopped. First one Sunday, then 2, then every week. I took the kids alone. People asked where she was. I kept my answers short. She had something come up. After a while, I stopped explaining. The arguments started around that time, too. Not loud ones at first. More like tension that never fully released. I'd ask a simple question, where she'd been, what time she'd be home, and she'd treat it like an interrogation. Why do you need to know everything? That kind of thing. I'd stay calm. She'd push harder. Then she'd go quiet for the rest of the night. One evening, I came home to find the kids in front of the TV with cereal for dinner at 7 o'clock. Ethan had milked down his shirt. Clara was already past her bedtime. Melanie was in the bedroom with the door closed. I got the kids sorted, cleaned up, and knocked on the door. She said she had a headache. I said okay and went to check on the laundry. There was a version of me that would have knocked again. Asked what was wrong. Tried to fix whatever was broken between us. I had done that for months. I had done exactly that. Every time I reached, she moved further back. Every time I brought up the distance, she turned it around. You're controlling. You don't give me room to breathe. You want me to be someone I'm not anymore. That last one stuck with me, because she was right, just not in the way she meant it. The person she was becoming, dismissive, absent, using language that sounded borrowed rather than hers, that wasn't someone I recognized. But the woman who used to make Sunday dinners and sing off-key in the kitchen and sit with me on the porch after the kids were down, that person I knew exactly. I asked her once directly, "Is this coming from Julie and Arya?" She looked at me like I'd accused her of something. So now I can't have my own thoughts? My friends are a problem? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She left the room. End of conversation. I went back to my notes. By the end of the second month, I had a clear picture. Not of a marriage in trouble. I'd known that for a while. What I had was a timeline. Specific dates, specific incidents, the school conference, the Sundays, the dinners, the arguments, and exactly how they started and how they ended. I wasn't building a case yet, but I was building something. And then her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one afternoon while she was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a message from Julie. I didn't pick it up. I didn't have to. The preview was enough. Did you tell him yet? Girl, you're way too good for that life. We've talked about this. I set my coffee down, stood there for a second, then I went to the garage and started changing the oil on the Tacoma. Some things need to sit before you decide what to do with them. I didn't bring up what I saw on her phone. Not that night, not the next day. I needed to understand the full extent of what I was dealing with before I said anything. Reacting too early is how you lose the advantage. So I kept quiet and paid closer attention. 2 weeks later, Melanie left her iPad on the couch. She'd been using it to message. She'd switched over to it at some point, probably because she thought I didn't check it. She was right that I hadn't, until that afternoon. She was outside with the kids. I had maybe 10 minutes. I didn't have to dig. The conversation thread with Julie was right there, going back months. I read enough to understand what had been happening in my own house without my knowledge. Melanie had been telling Julie that she felt trapped, that she'd given up everything to build a life she wasn't sure she wanted anymore, that I was suffocating her, that I controlled the whole household, that she stayed only because of Ethan and Clara. There was a message from 3 weeks back where she wrote that she was done pretending and that she was already thinking about what comes next. And then the one that settled it for me. Honestly, if I leave, I'm taking the kids. They need their mom more than they need a house in Huntsville. I put the iPad back exactly where it was. Went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, drank it slowly. They need their mom more than they need a house in Huntsville. That sentence didn't land like a gut punch. It landed like a decision, because right there, she had told me everything I needed to know about where her head was, what she was planning, and how much time I actually had before she made a move on her own terms. She wasn't drifting anymore. She had a direction. I went back outside. Ethan was on his bike, wobbling down the driveway. Clara was drawing something in chalk on the concrete. Melanie was on her phone, sitting in the lawn chair, not watching either of them. I crouched down next to Ethan, steadied his handlebars, and told him he was doing great. I didn't say a word to her. That evening, after the kids were in bed, she came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up. Normal like nothing. She asked if I wanted to watch something. I said I was tired. She shrugged and went back to the bedroom. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour after that. What she'd written about me, controlling, suffocating, the whole thing. I turned it over, looking for something true in it. That's a fair exercise. Maybe I had blind spots, but I kept coming back to specifics. I worked 40-plus hours a week doing HVAC installation and maintenance. I coached Ethan's Saturday soccer group when he turned 4. I handled the car maintenance, the home repairs, every DIY project this house needed, most of them on weekends. I had never told Melanie where she could go, who she could see, or what she could spend. I had asked where she was. That was apparently the problem. I called my older brother, Edward, the next morning on my lunch break. He'd been through a difficult divorce 6 years back and came out the other side steady. I trusted him more than anyone. I told him what I'd found. Not all of it, but enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need to talk to a family attorney. Not tomorrow. This week. And stop trying to fix it." He said, "You can't fix something the other person is already walking away from." I looked it up that same afternoon. Found a family law office in Huntsville, Stanton and Associates, reasonable reviews, took appointments on Thursdays. I booked one for the following week. That night, Melanie was in a decent mood for the first time in a while. She made pasta, sat with the kids, laughed at something Clara said. For a second, it looked almost like before. Almost. I watched her across the table and thought, she has no idea what's coming. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because she'd been planning for weeks while I was still standing in the kitchen trying to make things work. That was over now. She'd made her position clear in her own words to her friend when she thought I would never see it. She was done pretending. She'd written. So was I. The attorney's name was Blake Weston. Thursday at 4:30, a small office off University Drive, 2 chairs across from a desk stacked with files. He was maybe 50. No nonsense. The kind of guy who doesn't lean back and fold his hands when he's listening. He leans forward and takes notes. I laid out everything. The timeline I'd built, the school conference, the church, the messages I'd seen on the iPad. I'd screenshotted the most relevant ones the day after I found them, before she had any reason to delete anything. He looked them over without reacting and asked a few questions about the house, whose name was on the lease. Mine, I told him, and my brother co-signed when we first rented 3 years back. He wrote that down. He walked me through the basics. Alabama is an equitable distribution state, not 50-50, which meant the judge looks at contributions, length of marriage, and custody arrangements. He said the messages I had weren't legally decisive, but they established a behavioral pattern that mattered in a custody context. He told me to stop modifying my routine with the kids, keep doing the school runs, the Saturday soccer, the bedtimes, and document it. He said if she made a move first on custody, we'd already have months of evidence showing who was present. What if she tries to take them before we file? I asked. She can't just take them. You're a married, present parent with equal rights. She'd need a court order. If she tries anything outside that, you call me and we move immediately. He slid a card across the desk. Keep this on you. I drove home with a clearer picture than I'd walked in with. This wasn't a situation I was reacting to anymore. I had a plan, a timeline, and someone in my corner who knew what he was doing. That weekend, I told Melanie I wanted to talk. The kids were at my mother's for a Saturday afternoon visit. She watched them once a month, had since they were born. I waited until Melanie sat down at the kitchen table before I said anything. I want to know where we actually stand, I said. Not a fight, just an honest conversation. She crossed her arms. What do you want me to say? Whatever's true. She went quiet for a moment. Then, I feel like I've been disappearing in this marriage for 2 years. Like everything I do gets filtered through what you need, what the kids need, what this house needs. I don't know who I am outside of it. I listened. Let her finish. Are you in this marriage or not? I asked. She looked at the table. I don't know. There it was. Not a surprise, but hearing it said out loud in my own kitchen, it had a different weight. Then I'm filing for divorce, I said. She looked up fast. What? You just told me you don't know if you're in this marriage. I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to decide while everything else keeps falling apart. Something crossed her face. Not quite shock, more like she'd been holding a hand of cards and someone flipped the table. You can't just. That's not something you get to decide by yourself. I'm not deciding for both of us. You already made your decision. I'm just responding to it. I said I didn't know. That doesn't mean. Melanie. I kept my voice flat. I read your messages to Julie on the iPad weeks ago. I know what you've been saying. I know what you've been planning. So let's not do this part where you act surprised. The color left her face. She started to say something, stopped, started again. Those were private. You left the iPad on the couch. I wasn't looking for anything. I stood up. I've already spoken to an attorney. I'm not asking for your permission, and I'm not looking for a debate. I wanted to tell you directly, as a courtesy, before the papers get served. She pushed back from the table. You went to a lawyer without even talking to me first? That's after everything. That's who you are. I looked at her for a second. You told Julie you were done, pretending, and already thinking about what comes next. You wrote that you'd take the kids if you left. I picked up my keys from the counter. I'm just the one who moved first. You could be upset about that all you want. I went to pick up the kids from my mother's. She called 3 times on the drive over. I let go to voicemail. When I pulled back into the driveway that evening, Julie's car was parked out front. A white Nissan I'd seen enough times to recognize without thinking. I sat in the Tacoma for a moment. Kids in the back. Ethan already half asleep in his seat. I took a breath. Then I got out, unbuckled them both, and walked inside like I always did. Melanie was in the living room. Julie was on the couch beside her. Arya was standing near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, looking at me. The way people look at someone they've been talking about for months. I took in the whole room in about 2 seconds. Hey, buddy, I said to Ethan, go pick out your pajamas. Clara, can you help him? Clara looked between me and her mother, reading the room the way 7-year-olds do when they've been around tension long enough to recognize it. She took her brother's hand and went down the hallway. I turned to the three of them. Melanie spoke first. We need to talk about what you said earlier. We already talked. You blindsided me. You didn't give me any chance to. Melanie, I kept my voice level. You have two friends in our living room right now. I'm going to give you a choice. We have this conversation privately tomorrow with the kids at school, or we have it right now, all of us. And I say everything I have to say in front of your audience. Your call. Julie cut in before Melanie could answer. She needed support. You can't just. I didn't ask you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked at Julie directly, with respect. This is my house and my marriage. You've had enough influence in it already. That landed. Julie blinked. Arya shifted her weight, but said nothing. Melanie stood up. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the control. Control. I nodded slowly. Okay, let me tell you what control looks like to me. Control is deciding that your husband is the villain in a story you've been telling your friends for months, using language they handed you, and never once sitting down with him to have an actual conversation about any of it. That's what's been happening in this house. You read my private messages. You left your iPad on the couch, and yes, I read them. You want to talk about what was in them, or do you want to keep talking about how I found them? She didn't answer. You wrote that you were trapped. I said it plainly, no theatrics, that you stayed only because of the kids, that you were already thinking about what comes next, and that you'd take them when you left. I looked over at Julie and Arya. You two were the audience for all of that. I'm not angry at you, but I want you to understand something. She spent months telling you her version of this marriage. You never heard mine, and you helped her build a case against someone you've never spent 20 minutes with. Arya opened her mouth. I held up a hand, not aggressive, just firm. I'm not done. I turned back to Melanie. I provided for this family every single week. I was at every school event I knew about, and I say that because you missed the last one without telling me. I coached Ethan's soccer on Saturdays. I handled every repair in this house. I never told you who to be or who to spend time with. What I did was ask where you were sometimes. That's what became oppression in your version of things. I paused. So no, I don't accept that narrative, and I'm not going. Melanie's voice dropped. You don't have the right to make this decision. Not alone. This is our family. It stopped being a decision the day you wrote that you were done pretending. I said it without anger, which somehow made it hit harder. I didn't end this marriage. I'm just the one filling out the paperwork. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something true gets said and nobody has a counter for it. Julie looked at Melanie. Melanie looked at the floor. Arya picked up her bag. Maybe we should give them some space. Yeah, I said. That's probably a good idea. They left within 5 minutes. I heard the front door close, heard Julie's Nissan back out of the driveway. Then it was just the two of us and the sound of the kids moving around in the back bedroom. Melanie sat back down on the couch. She looked exhausted, not angry anymore, just hollowed out. She pressed her hands over her face and stayed like that for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. I didn't think you would actually do it. I know. I thought you'd. I don't know. Fight for it, for us. I sat down across from her, not beside her. I did fight for it. For almost a year, I tried to reach you. Every conversation, you deflected. Every time I brought up the distance, you made it about something I was doing wrong. I fought for this until you told your friend you were planning to leave and take my kids. I looked at her straight. That's where I stopped fighting for the marriage and started fighting for something else. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What happens now? The papers are being drawn up. Weston said we could expect them within 2 weeks. I'd recommend you get your own attorney before they arrive. I stood up. I'm not trying to make this harder than it has to be, but the kids stay here during the week. That's not a negotiation point. She started to say something. Melanie, my voice was final, not harsh. Get a lawyer. That's the conversation now. I want to check on the kids. Ethan was already in his pajamas, waiting for me to read to him. Clara had put herself to bed with a book, which she did sometimes when she needed things to feel normal. I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed and read 3 pages of the truck book he'd been carrying around for 2 months. He was asleep before I finished the second one. I turned off his lamp and stood in the doorway for a second, looking at him. Then I went to the garage, turned on the work light above the bench, and spent an hour organizing the toolbox. Not because it needed organizing, just because I needed something to do with my hands while everything settled into place. The papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Melanie was home. I wasn't. I had a job site in Madison, and I was already 20 minutes out when the process server made the stop. She called me twice. I let both go. There was nothing left to say on the phone that hadn't already been said in that living room. She hired an attorney 4 days later, a woman named Vera Holloway, family law, downtown Huntsville. Blake told me it was a reasonable choice, not someone known for aggressive tactics, which I took as a sign that Melanie still had some clarity left under everything else. The process moved like these things move, slowly, with paperwork, with waiting, with the occasional email between attorneys that you read twice and then set down. We worked out a temporary arrangement while things were pending. Melanie stayed in the house for the first 3 weeks, which I agreed to for the kids' sake. I stayed at Edward's place on a fold-out in his spare room, which he'd offered without me asking. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was temporary, and I knew that going in. What I wouldn't agree to was any arrangement that reduced my time with Ethan and Clara. Blake had advised me well. Months of documented presence, school pickups, soccer Saturdays, bedtime routines. When Melanie's attorney pushed for primary custody in her favor, citing the mother's traditional role, Blake put the record in front of the mediator without a word of argument. The record spoke for itself. The mediator recommended joint legal custody with primary physical residence at the family home with me. Melanie would have the kids every other weekend and 1 weeknight per week, with flexibility built in for holidays and school breaks. It wasn't what she expected. I could tell by the way she sat in that conference room, very still, very controlled, the way people get when they're absorbing something they didn't prepare for. She didn't fight the ruling. I think by that point, she knew she couldn't. And maybe some part of her understood why. The house stayed with me. My name had been on the lease from the beginning. My brother had co-signed, and I'd handled every renewal, every maintenance request, every interaction with the landlord for 3 years. Melanie moved out on a Saturday in early March, a few boxes, a friend's truck. I kept the kids at my mother's that day. There was no reason for them to watch their mother pack. She moved in with Arya temporarily, the same woman who had stood in my living room with her arms crossed, certain she understood my marriage better than I did. 2 adults, 1 apartment, splitting rent. I didn't take any satisfaction in that. I mention it only because there's a particular kind of irony in watching the architecture of someone's new life get built by the same people who helped tear down the old one. I hope it worked out for them. That part wasn't my concern anymore. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks after the papers were filed. No contested hearings, no difficult back and forth in front of judge. It moved quickly, which I think surprised some people who expected it to get messy. But there wasn't much to fight about once the positions were clear. When you've already said everything that needs saying, you don't need a courtroom to finish the conversation. Willowbrook had a men's group that met on Wednesday evenings, something I'd let slide over the years when the schedule got busy. I started going again in April. Nobody made a big deal of it. Pastor Reed shook my hand, asked how the kids were doing, and pointed me toward the coffee. That was enough. The Sunday dinners came back, too. Not the same as before. Nothing is ever exactly the same. But I started cooking on Sundays again. Simple things. Pancakes in the morning, something real in the evening. Clara had opinions about seasoning that she wasn't shy about sharing, which I took as a good sign. Ethan mostly cared whether there was enough syrup. We'd sit at the table, the 3 of us, and eat and talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. Trucks, school, a lizard Clara spotted in the backyard. Normal things. Melanie and I talked when we needed to. Handoffs, school updates, a scheduled conflict here and there. It was civil. Not warm, not close, but civil. The kids moved between us without drama, which was the only thing that mattered. There were moments, usually late at night after the kids were down, when I'd sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee and let the quiet settle. I'd think about the years we had, the ones that were genuine and the ones that were already coming apart at the edges before I saw it clearly. I didn't carry bitterness about it. Bitterness is expensive, and I had 2 kids to raise. What I did carry was a clear understanding of something I should have acted on sooner. That when someone tells you in their own words that they're already gone, you have to believe them. Not as a threat to negotiate down, but as information, as fact. She told her friend she was done pretending. The honest thing, looking back, is that she was right. She had been pretending, and so had I, in my own way. Pretending the distance wasn't growing. Pretending the next conversation might be the one that turned things around. Pretending that a marriage can survive when only one person is still trying to hold it together. It can't. That's not a tragedy. That's just how it works. One Saturday morning in May, about 2 months after everything was finalized, I pulled the Tacoma into the driveway after a hardware run. Clara was in the front yard with a piece of chalk, drawing something enormous across the concrete. It looked like a map of some kind, with labels I couldn't read from the street. Ethan was sitting in the middle of it. Inside a circle she had drawn, apparently placed there by his sister for reasons I didn't fully understand. He looked up when he heard the truck and waved both arms like I'd been gone a month. I parked, got out, and walked over to see what they were building. It's a city, Clara told me, without looking up from her drawing. Ethan is the mayor. Ethan nodded seriously. I'm a mayor. Good, I said. I crouched down next to the chalk lines, studying the map. Does the mayor need any help with infrastructure? Ethan considered this for a moment. Yeah, he said. We need more roads. I picked up a piece of chalk and got to work. One thing that stuck with me about this story is how easy it is to take something that was never a problem, a family dinner, a church routine, a husband who shows up, and reframe it as oppression when the right voices get in your ear. Nobody forced anything on her. Those traditions existed because she helped build them. But somewhere along the way, the narrative flipped. The stability became a cage. The presence became control. And the man who hadn't changed at all became the reason she couldn't breathe. Here's what the courtroom didn't care about. The speeches, the grievances, the months of messages about feeling trapped. What it looked at was the record. Who was at the school meetings? Who was on the sideline every Saturday? Who put the kids to bed? Presence isn't a romantic gesture. It's a legal argument. And it's also the only one that actually holds up when everything else falls apart. Well, that's where our video comes to an end. I really hope you have enjoyed your time here. Don't forget to leave a like, your comment, and also subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next.